Before G.I. Joe came on the air, I was essentially just starting out in the voice acting trade. And I was going out for auditions like everybody else. I'd already had one role as Lois Lane on Super Friends. But really, all things considered, I really hadn't struck it big as an animated voice until G.I. Joe.
I was watching episodes of Clutch Cargo, trying to imitate that cartoon style, and that actually did not work for G.I. Joe.
No, not very well.
No, I was doing much the same thing. I'd been a radio disc jockey and an actor and was doing voiceovers, doing narrations and TV promos and the occasional cartoon and praying for G.I. Joe.
That's exactly right. But we already knew each other by then.
Yes, we did.
We had met maybe 2 years before that.
Yeah, we did a very important production for a local department store's pillow department.
Yeah, Pillow Talk.
In which she remembered her lines and
he didn't.
I did not.
The audition process was a cattle call.
Classic Hollywood audition with people lined up holding their scripts, you know, wet with nervousness and
everybody
sweat.
in town was there, and everybody wanted a role on that show.
Yeah.
Although none of us could have known what it later became.
No idea. It was a big deal, and it was in Studio City, very close to Universal.
Right.
At a typical little
Hole-in-the-wall
audio facility
studio.
with overstuffed with writers and producers and executives and actors, literally snaking out the door, down the steps, onto the street, holding onto their scripts, going, "Okay, Lady J. Okay, Lady J."
And no one knew exactly what to shoot for, because you're just improvising at that point based on your own instincts. I remember I was teaching at Glendale Community College at the time, ESL. As opposed to waiting tables, I taught English as a second language. And the audition was in the afternoon, and I had already taken just a little too much time off from my classroom. So I basically didn't tell them I was leaving. And I hired a friend who also taught ESL to come in and take over the class for a couple of hours. I said, I'll be back in just 60 minutes, I promise. Raced to my Volkswagen, steamed hell-bent for leather to this funky little studio on Ventura, and joined everybody else in line. And when I got in there, I was auditioning for a smaller role, much smaller role. And Wally Burr, who was also directing the casting, as you recall.
Wally Burr, the youngest tank commander in World War II, who is still alive and
True
well.
Story.
And still directing the occasional animation session.
Absolutely. So he was there directing the audition session. And I auditioned for the smaller part, and then he kind of heard something he liked in my voice, and he threw this other role in front of me for Lady J. And he had me start screaming, "Yo, Joe," over and over and over again, and behaving as though I was either in peril or saving someone else from peril, backing further and further away from the mic and screaming louder and louder and louder. And I think one of the reasons that I was cast was because I was unafraid to just give it everything at the mic.
The male counterpart was, okay, so beat yourself up. And I'd never gotten a direction like that before. I said, you mean work harder? No, I have a fight. And I looked around for another actor that I was supposed to have a fight with. He said, no, just pretend you're in a fight. He goes, yeah, that hurt, didn't it? Yeah, it did. And there was a lot of that.
Yeah.
A lot of that.
Yep.
A lot of
karate kicks.
glottal stops. Yeah, a lot of tightening of the gut.
We used to joke about having to pick up little bits of our lungs off the music stands when the sessions were over with.
G.I. Joe was a huge technological leap forward in animation on American television. And interestingly enough, it was the Japanese who they relied on, who had developed the panning techniques, zooming techniques, and before that, Hanna-Barbera style cartoons and so on were more primitive looking. And so this was a much smoother, more fluid, more realistic looking.
And the use of humans instead of cartoon animals as well was a shift.
Yeah, quite so. And so it was a really pleasant surprise to look at it because we'd never really seen, it wasn't, the beautiful, precious Disney animation. It was stylized in its own way, but technically it had depth and fluidity that had never been built into television animation before. And it was fun.
It was impressive. And I think that the other thing that came out of not only the storyline, but the look of the show is the nature of the relationships of the people in the show themselves. And this is one area as well that G.I. Joe explored that really hadn't been explored to great lengths before. The way that the characters, and it's precisely because it was a constant war situation, the characters depended on each other and the intricacies of those relationships.
They brought in the kinds of writers who'd been writing episodic TV and sitcom as opposed to just cartoons with little squirrels, chasing after...
After you. No, after you.
Right.
No, after you.
And created human relationships.
Right.
I mean, the stuff that you and I did, our relationship...
I don't want to talk about that on camera.
Well, we'll talk about it later.
Okay.
Was really out there and fun, and not even the stuff of sitcoms at the time. I mean...
Right. It was very playful. There was an element of, you could tell the two had passion for each other, genuinely liked each other, respected each other as fellow soldiers. It was a very fully formed relationship.
And issues of larger issues of loyalty and ethics and
patriotism
and grieving and so on. Although no one died in G.I. Joe on the first day, before we ever saw an episode, we had no idea what it was going to look like. A young woman comes in with the scripts, the classic Hollywood script girl, and says hello, and here are your scripts. And there are about 11 of us there, and passes them on. She said, "We know there are some concerns about G.I. Joe. First off, no one dies." I said, "What do you mean it's a war cartoon?
Right.
How did no one die?" She said, "Well, parent groups have gotten involved and have put some pressure on the studio, and we've decided that people might parachute out of a burning plane over the horizon, but they don't die."
Yeah, no one died. They just disappeared.
Oh, whew, goodness, that means we could always come back.
Yeah, we could be good liberal actors and still come do the show. If G.I. Joe had been a 30-minute commercial for the toy, the fan clubs, the websites, and the continuing interest in the show would not exist today. It would have been so superficial, and it would lack meaning in any kind of resonant way to the people who grew up with G.I. Joe and who still believe in G.I. Joe and follow G.I. Joe, and also to new viewers. There was much more going on in these stories than just the fact that it was there to also promote the toys, which of course it was. But the very fact that they actually devoted these good writers to the scripts is, I think, one of the reasons that the toy sold as well as it did.
Yeah, I think there are two things going on. One was the quality of the show and the creation of the characters and the writing and so on. And the other was this brilliant merchandising. Now, I don't know if it was Hasbro who single-handedly was able to get television deregulated so they could advertise G.I. Joe toys within the 29 minutes of G.I. Joe. But obviously it was the television industry and the toy industry who made that happen with government deregulators. But it was a brilliant, satanically brilliant merchandising plot. And
you think Cobra was behind it?
Well, the script girl knew about it before we did because she said, advised us to buy the stock. But heretofore, for the first time in the history of modern television, it was now legal, because President Reagan deregulated. It was now legal to sell toys within the show that you would see. And after the miniseries, suddenly, Raindrop, Doof Pants, Leatherhead, I'm making this stuff up, but all this plethora of characters came on board. And it was fun, and lots of our friends would show up for the sessions, and, "Hey, what are you playing?" "I'm playing Dog Tears." "Really? Interesting." And if Dog Tears did 2 episodes, there was a Dog Tears doll. And when I was a kid, G.I. Joe was this really cool, sort of like the Barbie. Barbie for boys.
Butch Barbie.
But you could take off his helmet, you could put on a jungle hat, you could change his boots, put on a pair of thongs.
I'm not sure I want to know what you did with your doll, okay?
Well, it's me and my G.I. Joe. And, he was about this big, and he was like a Korean War veteran, and there were cartoons named after him. When our series came on board and the action figures came out, they shrank them down, made them overseas, and cloned them. So it's essentially the same figure, the same doll, but with slightly different coloring, slightly different head.
I think the fans would disagree with you, Billy. I think that, first of all, those smaller dolls did have some articulation and things that were fairly advanced for, see, you look just like your doll. No, the dolls were well made, and whereas there may have been some similarity between, say, Scarlet and Lady J, because they were similar body types. Still, the Baroness was completely different. Destro was different. See, he played with the earlier Joe dolls. That's how he's familiar with his Joe doll. I played with the later ones because, frankly, I'm a great deal younger than Bill.
1957, G.I. Joe was one guy. But suddenly, in 1983, became the Joe team.
Right, the Joes.
Right. And the big difference between G.I. Joe and cartoons that preceded it, and maybe cartoons that have come since, is the typical session for cartoons is 2, 3, maybe 4 hours.
Maximum.
For an episode. Wally Burr, the director of most of the episodes, kept us for 6 and sometimes 8 hours.
Much like a tank commander.
And he was a good guy. He just wanted good performances. And it took longer to get real, gritty, naturalistic, if I may be so bold as to say, television-worthy, film-worthy voice performances out of G.I. Joe actors.
One of the other trends that emerged from this was not so good for voice actors, and that was the use of on-camera actors providing voice acting services. And it was right around the time of G.I. Joe, particularly G.I. Joe the movie, when producers began realizing the value in casting on-camera actors for these projects. Now, mind you, it's not value to the project itself, because these weren't actors who were trained in our field. It's value in terms of the producer being able to impress the client by bringing these stars on board.
And celebrities enjoy it. I mean, they get lots of press, and it's fun. I mean, cartoon acting is fun.
Yeah.
It's truly fun. Nobody's looking at you. You can wave. There was one actor who did this when he was talking, and somebody said, "What are you doing?" And he said, "What do you mean, what am I doing?" Somebody said, "He's cleaning his aura," because this was the gesture that he gave as he was acting on microphone. And all of our little quirks,
yes.
and Michael Bell, the wonderful voice actor and director who played Duke, used to do this.
Yes.
And so he could hear himself. If everybody would know, just put your hand to your ear. This is what people in choirs do. This is what Gary Owens did. Disc jockeys do this. Rock singers, if they don't have a
they've lost all
set
their
of headphones, right? Because you can direct your voice into your ear and sort of hear yourself a little better. And I'd never seen a voice actor do that. And I asked Michael, I said, "Why do you do that?" And he just sort of looked at me and continued with his lines. And somebody said, "He's trying to keep his brains in his ears." But you to be able to be in a session and watch voice actors work, 11 or 12 of them lined up doing a battle scene,
yes.
all gesturing and being quirky and being strange, looking nothing like their characters, but creating a voice that looks like the character. Doing G.I. Joe has had really a tremendous effect on my life and career. A voice actor, announcer has to audition for jobs every day. Every day you're out of work, and you're always looking for work and auditioning for work. And I suddenly realized what a powerful thing G.I. Joe was when I was auditioning to do something on Discovery about World War II. And reading along and Hitler's forces and blah, 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 and the Italian armies. And I said, "You realize I'm G.I. Joe." And I said, "What?" I said, "Well, I played Flint on the Joe team." And their eyes widened and they looked at each other. "Well, you're the guy." I began to get the fact that because I was Flint, they would hear that voice, and I'm sure this happened to others on G.I. Joe as well, and I'm sure it's happened to you. Whether they know it or not, they're saying unconsciously, "That is the voice of the Joe team. I will cast that person. There is a natural authority. My project will benefit." The fact that we were so lucky to have been invited into the pantheon of Joe team voices has given us a saleability and a castability.
We are a part of pop culture. These voices are a part of pop culture, ours and our friends, and it does resonate. Absolutely.
And I can't tell you how much fun it is to talk to someone, who's in their 20s or 30s or 40s or whatever. And, well, what do you do? I sell insurance. Well, what do you do? I'm a voice performer. Oh, really? Well, what have you done? What do I've heard you on? I was Flint on G.I. Joe. I was Lady J.
Yeah.
There's a deep emotional connection there.
We do get that enormously positive response when people sort of discover what we do. And it's not as though we walk down the street with these badges on. We were on G.I. Joe. It's that when you're having an everyday conversation with somebody, you're talking about what you do, the first thing they want to know when you tell them you're a voice actor is, what would I have heard you on? And so you can talk about what you're doing currently, things that they might hear if they turned on the car radio, or in my case, if they turned on the car, because I'm the voice of OnStar. But it's one of those things that we as voice actors are so anonymous so much of the time. This is the kind of thing that you really not live for per se, because we do achieve tremendous gratification just in our work alone and in all the other things that we do outside of our work. But it is one of those things that lends validity to the work and that makes you feel like, wow, I guess I did do some good work. I did contribute to my field as a professional. Even today, if there was another Joe movie or another Joe series, and we are here today to urge the fans to demand that, frankly, because we'd love to work again on the show.
Oh, Lady J.
I'd love to come over, but I can't drive at night.
Can't find my Lipitor.
If there were a cartoon show today, a revival of G.I. Joe, if it held the same sort of ethic that the earlier Joe show did, I'd be the first one to get on board, because the notion of defending fundamental rights, whether we are protecting our own rights as American citizens to have free speech, to travel without worry within the borders of our country, certainly to travel without worry outside of the borders of our country, but to be free, even in these United States, is a goal worthy of defending.
I started in this business in and was with an ad agency, Leo Burnett Company in Chicago, and an awful lot of voice direction in that, character voices and straight voices for commercials. And I moved out here, or was moved out here by Burnett, and moved into their LA office, and then we started doing a lot of business with Hanna-Barbera. And I was working with Bill Hanna personally on commercials that we were producing using the Hanna-Barbera characters, Yogi and all the rest of them. And Bill liked the way I parted my hair and invited me to come aboard, and I did. So I got into doing, it was basically a start a commercial division with Hanna-Barbera, but then I got into doing voices for shows. So that's the procedure there. I've always said that the engine that drives a cartoon, especially in limited animation, which is what we are talking about even with G.I. Joe, with limited animation there has to be a lot of dynamics working in the dialogue, in the spoken dialogue. And if it isn't there, or if it's kind of dull, the show's dull. So in my mind, overemphasizing my own role in this, obviously, it's extremely important to have an energy and an attention to what's going on in the storyboard in terms of visually. If the guy looks like he's like that, or if the guy looks like he's cool and laid back, you have to play it differently, and you have to watch that very carefully. You can't just let the actors go ahead and read the script off the paper, because they have a script that just has the dialogue on it. Usually they do not have a script that has the scene content or the description of what the characters are doing. I have a storyboard in my mind, really, not one literally before me. A storyboard's too complicated to look at. I go through it in the preparation stage and find out every detail of whether the guy turns and does his line looking off camera, or whether he's looking directly into the camera, or whether he's running when he does it. Get all the dynamics working so that when I get into the session, I've now got my script and I'm on literally the same page as the actors are, because they have only a dialogue script. in most cases. And they're working from that. A storyboard is so complicated, you might ask, why don't you give it to the actors and let them react to that? It's much too complicated. They're saying, is that a zoom, or is that just an indication of where they're going to go with the frame? Or they just want to pay attention to their dialogue, and they depend upon the director to say, you're running along the edge of this cliff, so you're scared, and you're also angry at what has just happened, that has to come through in the way you say the lines that are on the page with the script only, with the dialogue only. So the board, excuse me, the storyboard has been pretty much absorbed by whoever's directing a session by the time you go into a recording session. He's done his notes on that, put them someplace else, but now is working with the dialogue script. But the board is in his head. The board is very specific on what's going on. The attitudes are shown, the actions are shown. You go through that in detail and then say, okay, I'm going to play it this way in order to make those voices work for the storyboard, which, as I said before, is now someplace else over on a shelf. I've looked at it. But you study that thing very carefully. I'd say I spend for a show that's going to record in 4 hours, a half-hour show, you spend probably 6 to 7 hours working on relating the storyboard to the dialogue and saying this means this, and I have to have this, and this has to be pumped up, and this has to be physical, and so on. It's a detailed process of absorbing what's on the board, which is extremely important, but I don't take it into the session because it gets in the way there. The process of developing the characteristics of a character, whether he's belligerent or tough or understanding or intelligent or whatever, is kind of a long process. The first thing is done, the writer of the show, the one who's the story editor of the show, writes out a detailed description. He even includes the man's real name. Most of the characters in G.I. Joe had nicknames, and their real names were not usually seen in the show or heard in the show, but they had them. And there was a backstory. Went to Harvard in 1944 and graduated cum laude and such. All of that was backstory that was given to us to work in terms of auditioning people, and we'd tell them or show them the card that was the background on this guy. So they had a pretty good idea of at least the type of character we were looking for. Now, if the guy said, what if I gave it a little bit of a British accent or mid-Atlantic accent, you'd say, yeah, try that. And we would do maybe 7 or 8 people audition for that, and then that material would go to the guy who was the executive producer of the show. All of these would have been past me, and I would have said, yeah, I'm happy with pretty much any one of them. What do you think? They would make the final choice, and they'd come back and say, we're hiring so-and-so. So then I would work with that actor when we got in, and we would bring up the audition tape and say, this is what they liked. And we will play it again, and once in a while during the show, if you begin to lose your character a little bit, we'll play it again for you. So we keep it drilled in, and we don't end up wandering off in terms of the kind of characterization we're creating. Hasbro had an advertising agency who actually came up with the idea, let's not just do commercials, let's do entire shows, which is what they were. They were half-hour commercials in the sense that they exposed the action figures and the toys and so on that were related to G.I. Joe. They did really a very conscientious job of trying to do stories that were not just ways to present this toy and this character. They got very involved in creating for kids of 12 to 20 stories that stood up and had real plots to them. Generally, a half-hour show has to be recorded within 4 hours. That's the Screen Actors Guild allows you 1 paycheck, 4 hours with the actor. If you go over that, he gets overtime. So it's my obligation to try to to finish with him to complete his work within the 4-hour time. I have prior to that spent 6 hours at least on analyzing the dialogue and seeing how it should play, and occasionally calling the writer and saying, this doesn't make sense to me, or would you accept this idea and get a change that I felt was more compatible with what we were trying to do in the show. Sometimes the writer would say, no, you don't understand, and explain to me, and I'd say, okay, all right, yeah, we'll stay with what you wrote. But then the session itself, let's say it's scheduled for 2 o'clock. Well, I got to get them out of there by 6 o'clock. I have worked out a schedule so that if I don't need certain actors, I don't have them come in and sit around waiting. I tried to have them arrive a little before, enough time to mark up their scripts. But basically, here's a session. You go in, you get levels with the actors that are going to be in the first sequence, which could be in the tail of the show. You don't always record in order. You record in an order that's most efficient for calling the actors and having them on deck. Anyway, I would explain the first sequence we were going to do. Let's say it's a continuous thing where they come into a room, they find prisoners in there, take the prisoners and send them off, and then call on the headquarters. I'd talk to them about that whole thing, have one rehearsal where they all do it aloud but not recording, and then say, any questions? I give them some notes like, I want him a little bit more angry at the point where such and such. You got to take a blow. This guy strikes you. You've got to give me enough of a so that I feel it, not just a little thing. So get all that worked out. Okay, you ready? And we've gotten levels during that rehearsal process, and we roll and do that probably once through. And I'll say, I'd like you to keep that. Let's do a couple of pickups at the very beginning, and to fix it. It was a little bit not aggressive enough coming in, and we would do that over again. And everybody happy? Fine, chop. Next. And bring in the next 3 guys that might work with these guys already or continue with these guys. But it's a continuing. I did it sequence by sequence. And there has been in the past, I first was exposed to doing cartoon shows by having a rehearsal of the whole show, which can last 2 hours, and then you record the show in another 2 hours. I found that they begin to lose interest. Their attention flags. So if you keep it sequence by sequence, they're always saying, yeah, now let's do that. It's a matter of a choice of how you like to work. But I think that works better than rehearsing the entire show. Oh, by the end of the rehearsal, people are doing that. So that's typically a show, and it's just 4 hours, and it's standing up and paying attention. And I'd occasionally get a little stiff with guys who were outside joking around and didn't know when they were supposed to come into the studio to work and so on. We had a speaker in the reception room so they could stay with the show and know when their parts were coming up. I just figure that the guy's working for a damn good salary, somewhere around $6 today, ought to be paying attention and be on deck for what's required of him. I'm very surprised at the tremendous amount of continuing interest, and from guys who saw these shows when they're 13 and they're now 30. How long has it been? 80, 85, 86 to now. Anyway, I'm surprised by it, and I do not find myself as fascinated with going back and looking at them again. And your original question was, do I look at them? No, because it always kind of disappointed me to see what I thought could have been better. And that's just a limitation of what you can put in an animation. I mean, it is not live action. There are a lot of things where things get a little static and not as much dynamics is going on as you had hoped when you directed the dialogue for the show.
Well, the cartoons I grew up with when I was watching TV back when, I'm dating myself now, it's back when it had black and white sets, was the Astro Boys, the Gigantors, the Speed Racers, and later on it was like the Space Ghosts and Herculoids, and those type of action adventure shows were really exciting when I was growing up. And those shows actually, when I was watching them, I try and draw them in my homework books to try and, get an inspiration that would take them with me and try and improve as an artist. And I was lucky enough to have friends that I had like three or four other friends that we were all artists and we all liked the same things. And so we were able to practice and compete with each other and come up with different story ideas and everything. So it was a lot of fun. My first job was over at Filmation. And what it was is I had been in fixing computers for like 7 years. And I'd been doing that, and I had always wanted, there was this little seed that wanted to draw again. And so I had a friend, Mark Evanier, who gave me a hint that they were hiring at Filmation. So I went there and took a test, and I took the test like 2 or 3 times, and I didn't make it because I was trying to become a layout artist. And the art director at the time said, my book was open, and he saw that I drew these comic books with my friends. We drew stories for ourselves. And he took a look at that and he said, oh, what's that? I said, I showed it to him what we were doing. He said, you might be good for storyboards. I'm going, what storyboards? I had no idea. He took me up to the upstairs the producer, and I showed him my work. He gave me a test. I came back the next day because basically it was just storytelling like I had been doing before, and he gave me a job. I took it home the next day, brought it in, I impressed him. I impressed him enough that he took what I drew and put it into the show he was producing at the time. So he got a little bit free work, but at least I got a job out of it, And that was great. That's how I got started in storyboards. And from that point forward, I was there for about another year at Filmation. Then I moved, then Stanley from Marvel Comics opened up a studio called Marvel Productions. And they were doing the syndicated Spider-Mans. And I moved on from Filmation to his studio, and I was there for like the next 9 years working on all the shows I had there, one of which was the G.I. Joe miniseries. And from that point forward, we did the commercials first, then the series, and then the 65 episodes that came next. I had never really imagined that we'd have a chance to actually do the G.I. Joe series. But when the opportunity came, everybody, myself and the other artists, we were like leaping at the chance to take on this project because it was so exciting. You got to remember at the time we were working on network television, and we had a lot of restrictions. You know, if you could imagine this, like you have a good guy here and the bad guy's coming at you, this is how you had to draw it. And as the bad guy comes at you, the good guy steps aside, the bad guy goes through scene, the camera holds, you have a camera shake, and then you cut to the bad guy, and he's like in a prone position, he hurt himself or something. That was our action. That's what we could draw. We couldn't do regular, what I call action adventure. And when the G.I. Joes came out, it was, at the time, syndication did exist back then. It doesn't exist now. We were able to just draw it the way it's supposed to. Just like the Space Ghost, the typical action adventure shows. We were able to do that in G.I. Joe, and that was a lot of fun. It was like being released and just, okay, go for it, and that's what we did. One of the challenges was trying to draw the action techniques but not show anybody getting hurt, because it's all in fun. Even though it's a dramatic show, you obviously couldn't draw bullets, couldn't show blood, none of that stuff. So it's like, okay, this is the A-Team, kind of like a little bit of coming to the A-Team, a little bit of that. So we just would try and stage the character so it looked kind of realistic, but hide behind stuff and shoot their little laser beams here and there and stuff. But yeah, it's one of those things you have to, okay, it's television, it's for kids, you got to remember your audience, and so you got to entertain them, even though you might want to do real combat, but you just make it fun for the kids, and make it fun for the kids and their family. The process that a storyboard artist has when he's creating a show is that we would usually get a script from the writer, and we'd meet with the producer at the time, the director at the time, and we'll go over the script with him about what he's looking for in the script, what type of angles, what type of, if there are specific items that the client wanted us to hit. And then from that point forward, usually the scripts are about 30, 35 pages long, and we would take it, and then we'd have 3 weeks in order to create the entire visual show. Now the show will be divided into three, by that length of a show, you divide it between 3 artists. And between the 3 of us, we'd all be at the same table, and we would talk about it, about what we're going to do, how are you going to end your sequence, so then I can hook up to your sequence. So the characters are all going left to right or right to left, so there's not that much of a hookup problem between the artists. Or if you couldn't do that, then you come up with what I call an omnidirectional cut, so that there wasn't any type of like weird connection between the 2 sequences. And it just took about 3 weeks. You just went in your booth and you were just drawing like crazy, and just trying to be inspired. You read the script, you try and visualize it, and try and come up with the best, most exciting images that you can imagine. Later on when I was working on the G.I. Joe series, one of the directors was leaving. He was leaving the series, and the supervising producer, his name was Don George. I had always told him that I wanted to be a director. I wanted to just take the next step up and be in charge of the whole show and try and give it the whole vision of what I was looking to do. And when his name was, I believe it was Sam Weiss, he left the series, and Don said, "Are you ready for it?" And I went, yes, of course. And that's where I got my first shot at being a director and taking over and taking care of the entire show. Instead of, when you're a storyboard artist, you have 1 act out of 3 you're taking care of. But when you're the producer, you got the vision of the entire show, and you can really enhance the entire vision of the story arc for the entire show, and also enhance all the action adventure, because you can manipulate a lot of things. There's a lot of things with music, sound effects. Those are some of the other subtle ways you can help enhance a show and make it more exciting for the kids. I've always wanted to try and write for G.I. Joe, but a lot of the slots, at the beginning were pretty much taken up. And what happened was near the middle to end of the series, a slot opened up, and they came to me and said that if I had an idea that I could submit a script idea and see if they would go for it. So I partnered with a writer friend of mine, and we came up with. I had always wanted to do a buddy film because buddy films seem to work really well. You have two buddies with, kind of like fun personalities, and they go to an adventure. And the one thing I wanted to do was do a story where it was a buddy film and keep the adventure personal, because those are the most fun ones. So that, you're not like trying to go from point A to point B to point C in order to get the device that'll get rid of the da-da-da-da-da. No, let's make it a personal thing because it's more fun that way. And so he agreed. We came up with a premise, and we used the two fun. We thought were the two kind of different. The two characters had the most different personalities that would kind of mesh together in an emergency. That they worked together well, and so that's basically how it came together. My stint on G.I. Joe was probably the most fun I ever had, because it was a chance for me to basically cut loose creatively, and I was able to really build on my skills of directing films and directing and figuring out how to tell the best story possible. It was probably the best period of my I've been doing this for like 20 years now, and that period stands out in my memory. It's like it was yesterday, because it was such fun. I know it was a job, but it was also fun. It was just fun. It was just a fun 5-6 years of working on it. And I think the best way to describe it would be that when we did the G.I. Joe movie, I was in competition with my friends, and because the director, Don George, said, okay, I need an opening titles, best man wins, you guys be creative and come up with something to impress me. And that's when I went ahead and I created this, the G.I. Joe saving the Statue of Liberty sequence. And literally, as I was, because you're drawing it, there's no script, I'm just making it all up off the top of my head. I was able to cut loose and come up with some visuals, and then when Don George saw it, he picked mine out of the other two, and that's the one that you see at the beginning of the G.I. Joe movie, where the Cobra's trying to attack the Statue of Liberty, and G.I. Joe's there, and they save him, and it's this huge fight going all around the Statue of Liberty. It was animated excellently. They did an excellent job overseas in animating this thing, and it was fun to watch it, because it's like having going from a TV budget to a theatrical budget, and then on a theatrical budget, they're animating your images that you've been on the storyboard. It's like, wow, this is, I was really, really impressed when I saw the dailies, when I saw the finished product. It was great. And so, yeah, G.I. Joe was without that, it would have taken me a lot longer to develop the skills that I have without that series being there.
In 1983, oddly enough, the Japanese were ahead of the Americans with panning techniques, zooming techniques on animation to make it look real. So, cells were created in Tokyo and shipped to the States. And about 6 months into the series, we were told that a bunch of the animators in North Hollywood had gotten very, very ill, and that production had halted for a short time. And there was some mysterious inference that it was because of the cells that were shipped from Japan.
Right, I remember
And
that.
everybody thought, well, this is mythic. I mean, this is bizarre. I mean, was this sabotage? And in fact, what had happened was Japanese animators working on their advanced equipment, as of course the Americans have certainly since caught up, but were behind by a few years. Japanese animators had literally infected the cells with flu because they handle them and they draw on them.
Mm-hmm.
And it's cellulose.
It's like an agar dish.
Right.
Yeah.
And put
A bunch of Petri dishes shipped over to the United States teeming with virus.
They sent thousands of cells over that people had coughed on. And the American animators from Marvel and Sunbow pulled him out and started working on
Got
him. And
down on those cells.
started coughing, and all took ill. And so there was this kind of international bacterial intrigue going on.
It wasn't
which-
SARS, it was cells.
Right, which may or may not have forced the Americans to ramp up their computer technology and get with it, which ultimately, obviously, we did.
Right.
As a child, I listened to radio, and I would listen to shows. There was a show in particular called Can You Top This?, where they did different jokes, and then they had a specialist who did dialects, and I specialize in dialects because I became a stand-up comedian doing all the things that I learned on radio as a child. A friend of mine was writing commercials, and he asked me to create some voices. And the first thing I did was the voice of a flannel elephant. Your guess is as good as mine. I created a voice, and they said, "Oh my God, that sounds just like a flannel elephant." I said, "Okay, if you say so." And I went on from there. I started doing voices in New York. That's where I'm originally from. I came out here, I was co-starring in a series with James Earl Jones, a show called Paris. He and I had done Shakespeare in the Park together. And Steve Bochco saw us in a movie, and he wrote a series for us, a show called Paris, which unfortunately was short-lived. And it was about the police department. James was a captain who taught criminology, and I was his boss. My agent had sent me up because I do a lot of voices, cartoon voices. I do a number of things. So I went up and I auditioned, and they said, "You're a dial tone." And I went, "Oh, I'm Hank Garrett." And they said, no, forget that, you're a dial tone. They gave me a picture. And they said, try to create a voice for this particular character. I came up with a couple of voices. One was a gruff voice. And they said, no, he's the communications expert. And there was someone doing a gruff voice. Chuck McCann was doing the voice of Leatherneck. And then I came up with this kind of a sound. And that dial tone. Wally Burr was probably one of the nicest and one of the most inventive people I've ever worked with. He never said, "No, that's wrong, and you got to do it this way." He was very gentle in his direction, and he would lead you to exactly where he wanted you to go. He was a marvelous man. Dick Gautier, who was Serpentor, he and I knew each other from New York. Same with Chuck McCann, who was Leatherneck. And we'd seen each other, the cast, we'd seen each other many times at different places. And we finally got to work together, and it was a picnic. We had more fun, and Wally said, "Okay, fun's over, let's go to work." They said, "Work? Well, what are we here for?" They said, "G.I. Joe, remember?" It's, "Oh, okay." And it was great, it was just fun. When I came home and told my son that I was going to be dial tone on G.I. Joe, he couldn't believe it. He said, "Dad, you don't look like him." I said, "I know, but I'm just going to do the voice." And he went around telling everyone, "My dad is dial tone on G.I. Joe." And of course the kids at school went, "Sure he is, right." I had to go to his school. And I bought a box of the figures, and I gave them to the kids, and I was doing the voice at his school. It was wonderful to see these faces light up. Oh my God, it is him. The recording session was, we would come in, be given the script, we would sit at a table, and we'd do a read-through. We would each read the characters, our respective characters, and one by one, we would get up and walk into the studio where they were shooting or taping, and it was so interesting because we'd get finished and wouldn't leave. We would sit around and have discussions. And Wally led these meetings, and we'd be there for hours. And finally he would say, "Guys, I have to close up." And we would talk about the next episode. We never knew what the story would be. We wouldn't know anything about it until we got there and were handed the script. And we would get into it. Fortunately, everyone on the show were wonderful actors. So we were quick studies, and it's not like we had to memorize, but we knew our characters, and we knew what was expected. In my career, and I've been in the business for almost 50 years, there were only two things that had given me a lot of recognition. One was 3 Days of the Condor, which I won the New York Film Critics Award for, the film with Robert Redford and Faye Dunaway. And the other was G.I. Joe. I do celebrity autograph shows, and people will come over and ask me if I was dial tone on G.I. Joe, and I say, yes, I was. And the line of people to ask me questions about G.I. Joe, and people would show up in uniform. And and it was incredible. I went to it was a small convention, a G.I. Joe convention. I was a guest there. And it was nothing but G.I. Joe paraphernalia. The entire room was full of dolls, weaponry, and guys dressed in camouflage outfits. I mean, and I understand it's the world over, which is fantastic.
Listen carefully. My ancestors had a secret chant they used before sending a sacrifice down the shaft. By using the chant, we might be able to lure it away from Cobra Island and into a deep-sea trench.
Well, you know us. Anything for a laugh. Let's give it a try.
Anybody listening to this backwards for a secret occult message is a real dweeb.
Här snurrar vi snällt. Fall off med finne. Så har du.